Welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast.
To me, being perfect is not about that scoreboard out there.
This is a chance of a lifetime.
When you can understand the person, you can then work towards a common goal.
We are all on the same team.
Know your role and do it to the best of your ability.
Focus on the fundamentals. We've gone over time and time again.
Your defense has got to be better.
Leave no doubt tonight.
Great moments are born from great opportunity.
Hello and welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast, where we believe that there is no algorithm for leadership, and so we interview great sports coaches from around the world to try and find ideas to help all of us lead our families, our colleagues and our teams better. Our great coach on this episode is Don Showalter. Don is a basketball coach who over 32 years coached in high schools in America. In that time, he led teams to 601 wins, 8 conference titles and 11 district championships. In 1998, he served as head coach of the Youth USA team at the 1998 Nike Hoop Summit. Then in 2001, he became chair of the USA Basketball Cadet and Youth Committee. He was then appointed coach of the USA Under-16 and Under-17 teams and led those teams to 10 gold medals and 62 straight victories. He is considered one of the best youth basketball coaches of all time and has lectured all over the world. He also has a new book out called Cornfields to Gold Medals. Some of the highlights from our interview were the communication circle his teams use to finish training, where they hold hands and focus on connecting with each other. The importance of, quote, being where your feet are, end quote, as you can't be a coach 24/7. And how he mentors the way he was, and that means not telling people what to do, but laying out the facts for them so they can make their own decisions. And just before we go to the interview, if you enjoy listening to the podcast and would like to learn more, you can head over to the website, thegreatcoachespodcast.com. There you will find more video and podcast content taken from the 150 plus interviews we have done with some of the world's great coaches. You will also find our insight database where we have snipped out insights from the videos of our interviews on leadership topics like culture, communication and conflict. You can search through by keyword, sport or coach, download and share them. We'll be adding to it regularly as we interview more great coaches from around the world. And now, please enjoy our interview with Don Showalter.
You're listening to the Great Coaches Podcast.
Don Showalter, good morning my time. Good afternoon to you and welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast.
I'm thrilled to be on this podcast. I know you've done a lot of coaches in the past, and I'm just thrilled to be a part of what you're doing.
Don, something really simple to get us going. Could you tell us where you are in the world and what you've been up to so far today?
I'm based in Iowa, but Colorado Springs is where our office is at. So I get there now and then, but basically I travel so much that it doesn't really matter where I'm located. I can travel from wherever I want to. So I'm between camps right now. I run a Snow Valley basketball school where we have 375 campers in each session. We have 4 sessions, and I'm right in the middle of that right now. So it's a busy time, but good time. Anytime you deal with basketball, it's a good time.
We're going to talk all about those travels. We may even talk about the camps as well as we go along, because I know you met someone famous there. But could I just start, Don, by talking about some of they are actually the giants in the coaching world that you've had experience with. John Wooden, George Revling, Pat Riley, and of course there's Mike Krzyzewski as well. I have to ask you, from this perspective, with some of the greats, what do you think the really great ones do differently that sets them apart?
You know, that's a great question, because in my travels, I get to go to practices and watch players and watch coaches coach. And so I think there's some things that really set coaches apart. And I would say, you know, obviously one of those is organization, being organized. I think that's a key factor for different coaches that to make them a little bit better. And I always tell our players and coaches alike that, in order to be a little bit better, you got to be a little different. If you did the same thing everybody else does, you'd be like everybody else. And so I think the great coaches are a little bit different in the aspect of very organized. And what I mean by organization is they not only are organized with their practice plans and writing down things, but they're also very organized with their thoughts, how they're going to teach. And I think that's one of the things that John Wooden was very good at. Jay Wright is a good friend of mine as well, and I think he's really spectacular at doing things that they know how to present something. So being organized in that aspect. Of course, Coach K is probably one of the top people in that. I also think there's some other things that really go into making a great coach. I think humility is one. I think the great coaches are very humble. John Wooden was as humble as anybody else, and he didn't have to be. He won 10 national championships, but he was very, very humble and really took, us young coaches at his camp under his wing and really was trying to, give us something to make us better. And I think he certainly did that. Jay Wright's very humble. So I think humility has a lot to do with it. And I always say humility is something that if you don't have humility, you're probably not going to learn anymore. Being humble allows you to learn, as much as you can. So I think those are two of the main things that make good coaches great. And sometimes I think the term great is overused a lot in my estimation. I don't think there are a lot of great coaches. I think a lot of very good coaches. But I think there's some separation there as to what really makes the great coaches different from the very good coaches.
Don, in the book, you tell the story of writing to John Wooden and asking for an opportunity to coach at his camp. And it was at this moment, perhaps more than any in the book, or definitely the way that you presented it, that changed the trajectory of your life. And I'm just wondering, what did this lesson, this reaching out to John Wooden, what did this teach you?
Well, first of all, I was just a young, college graduate and wanted to do I was, I still am passionate about the game of basketball. So I wanted to be around the best. And whoever that was at that time, of course, it was John Wooden. But, it first of all, it taught me to step out of my comfort zone a little bit, writing a letter to Coach John Wooden, who was arguably the best coach in the world at that time. And so it allowed me to step out of my comfort zone a little bit. And also, I think taught me that, sometimes you have to, even if the door may close, I think you have to take chances with opportunities. And that's what I did. And, I was shocked to get a handwritten note back from Coach Wooden and led to being a counselor the first year, and then also being a coach that first year. That time I was like 21 years old, and I would have done. I was doing everything as a counselor. Mopping floors and blowing up pumping up basketballs, and just doing whatever I could. And evidently, I did those things pretty well, because then they asked me to be come on board as a coach. So. I think those kind of things teach, especially young coaches, the fact that you have to make the initiative. I mean, people are not going to come calling to you to, hey, can you coach this team, or can you have to make the initiative, and then that starts the whole train of making contacts and making good contacts with other coaches and other opportunities opening up. So that was definitely one of the things that certainly helped me out.
There's a terrific passage in the book that says, and this is the quote, "The energy for building a program rests with the head coach, but the implementation of that energy lies in that coach's ability to empower assistant coaches to be part of the process." Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, can you share with us the best ways that you've learned to empower others?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, And as a young coach, I didn't really understand that. But as I, coached more years, I understood, first of all, that I was not, I could not do everything I wanted to do. I mean, there's only so much time. And so in order to really complement what I wanted to do, I have to empower my assistant coaches. And not only my assistant coaches, but, student managers and people that are in your program. First of all, it gives them a feeling that that program is part of them too. I think that's so huge for them to have that feeling that, hey, this isn't just Coach Showalter's program. It's my program too. So, I would give our assistant coaches duties like, one's in charge of our post players, one's in charge of our guards, and they pretty much had the whole handle on substitution patterns for those areas during ball games. If they felt that one of our post players or bigs needed to break, and they were allowed to substitute for them. So it really empowered them to be an assistant coach with some a little bit of leverage and a little bit of learning that goes on with that. So they took, I think, all the assistants I had took real pride in the fact that they were a major part of the program.
And I think one of the challenges I always find with empowering others is learning to let go, not be as involved in the details. How did you evolve when it came to that area?
That's a great question. First of all, I think the term humility comes into that, knowing that I don't know all the answers, and I'm also learning. So I think letting go. I think the more I gave them, the better I felt. So we started out, small. And here's something that you can do. And I think even, when it comes to mega corporations, I think the people that are CEOs have to let go a little bit and trust the people that are working for them. I mean, that's the big thing. I think is the trust factor is huge. So if I trust my coaches, I'm going to give them pretty much the freedom to do what they think is best, and then I have to trust that it's going to work out. And we all have these discussions. I think we have discussions about it, but and in the end, they know that if I need to change something, I will. But by the same token, is I think that trust back and forth between assistants, it's also good because then I think the players have more trust in the coaching staff than if it's just comes from one person. So whether you're a CEO or a coach, I think it's the same type of thing that goes into that pattern of letting go and trusting the individuals that are working for you.
Don, there was one 12-month period in the mid-90s there where you coached the best high school players in America at the basketball festival, the All-American game, and the Nike Hoops Festival. It was a pretty intense 12 months. And I'm wondering, when you reflect on that period, how did it elevate your own leadership?
At the time, I probably didn't think about it much, but as I look back on that, I think first of all, it elevated my leadership from the standpoint of organization. I mean, I was really, I really tried to be organized in what I was doing. With coaching high school, average high school players, I would say. We had some college players, but average, not elite players. But then you're coaching elite players in the McDonald's game. You're coaching NBA guys in the McDonald's and the Hoop Summit. So I think my organization and confidence really grew having been able to coach those teams. And really, I tell people I didn't coach those elite players any different than I coached my high school team. I mean, to me, players just want to get better, and sometimes you just flat out coach them, and you're not going to coach them any different than I think you coach your high school team, because essentially you want them to become better just like you want your high school team to become better. And then I think that builds a lot of trust in those kids that trust you as a coach, that you can deliver some things that are going to make them get better, help them get better.
I have to ask, as the father of teenagers, you've spent your whole career coaching teenagers, and I'm wondering what you've learned, if anything, about the best way of engaging with them when it comes to having more difficult conversations.
Oh boy. Yeah, I think two of the pillars that I think really come into play with coaching, and not only coaching, just being a parent or being somebody who's around, I think is the one pillar is care. You really have to show you care, and I think that allows the people under your direction to open up to you, and when they know you care, and I think you have some really good conversations about what's going on in their lives. And the second thing, as I brought up before, I think trust. Teenagers have to trust you to do what's best, and when they trust you, they're gonna open up a little bit and give their thoughts to you, because they trust you not only to keep it maybe between you and them, but they also trust your knowledge and trust you to give them some good advice. So to me, those are the two things. Before you can give anything, I think you got to develop caring and trust in order to kind of get them to feel that you really do have what it takes to help them.
Don, what did you learn from George Raveling about preparing players mentally to compete?
Coach Raveling was one of the best. I mean, he coached here in Iowa, and that's where I got to know him really well. He was actually endorsed my book, and I've known him and worked with him at Nike and some camps and throughout. But, Coach Raveling, he had so many great experiences, for one thing. I mean, as a young man, he was part of some of the things that went on in our country with racial items that came up, and so he was really he really had some great thoughts about his experiences. And I think just listening to him was amazing. Second thing that I thought was that tremendous from his standpoint is how many books he read. I mean, he read books after books after books, and he loved to read books. And I spent some time with him when he at Iowa, when he just got done reading books. He talked about a book he just read, and how great it was that he could filter into that book. And so those are some of the things I really remember about Coach Raveling. The other thing I really remember is how much he cared about his players. I mean, that was probably the thing as a young high school coach that I remember most. I go to watch practices with Coach Raveling, and really how much he cared about his players. And you could just tell that on the practice court, as well as off the practice court. And he still has a very caring attitude when I visit with him and when he visits with other people. So to me, those things stand out a great deal.
He's high up on my wish list to interview one day. His stories are quite inspirational, and I think he's
very inspirational. Like I said, most of his stories, Coach Raveling's stories, come from when he was a young coach or a young man, and he's dealing with a lot of different things when he was growing up, and how he handled those, and it's inspiring. It really is.
Well, as is his Martin Luther King story, but we'll save that for another day.
Yeah.
Don, being a head coach, it can be an all-consuming vocation. In fact, I am starting to form the opinion that it leads to a very unhealthy obsession. But looking back, what have you learned about managing the role so that it doesn't negatively impact your life?
Yeah, as a young coach, I tell young coaches that, wow, you really need to make sure that coaching is not a 24/7 thing, and you can't let it be who you are, because really, the coaching aspect is just what you do. It's not who you are. And sometimes coaches don't understand that when I tell them that. But I think when we all know this phrase of be where your feet are. And I think that was a prime example for me as I was a young coach. When I was home, I had to be home. And that's where my attention was with my wife and kids as they were younger. And, during a 2-hour practice, my feet were in the gym, and I was very much intentional about having the best practice I could. And then usually, after the kids went to bed, I would spend time watching film or making next day's practice. So you don't trend on really your family's time with you just being a coach 24/7. And I coached my son when he was in high school. And one of the rules we had was, when we're at home, I'm not going to mention anything about practice or a game with my son unless he brings it up. Now, if he brings it up, then we'll start the conversation. But often what would happen, I'd be watching film of the game, and he would come to my downstairs film room, and we'd watch it together. So, but I would never ask him, hey, come on down, let's watch film, or try to correct him at home, because I couldn't do that to anybody else. And I didn't think it was fair to him for me to be a coach all the time. He needed to see me as a dad. So great question. And it's something I think that all coaches really struggle with. Where does the time come in for, and the higher up level you go to, your recruiting and everything else like that. And the high school coach, you don't spend time recruiting, but you certainly spend time, with your own team and doing team bonding things as well. So I think you really have to be intentional about where you are and what that time involves.
When it comes to working with elite talent, in the book, you talk about a 4C framework that you use to help separate people who are similarly talented. Could you tell us about that framework?
Yeah, we have what we call the 4 C's of USA basketball. And I think first one is one of them is comfort zone. And I think really players have to get out of their comfort zone. We have to get out of our comfort zone as coaches, as individuals, as CEOs of companies. I think if we just stay in a comfort zone, we're not going to continue to learn like we need to, or, we're not going to be able to grow like we want to as a coach or as a player. So one of our jobs, I think, as coaches is to get players out of their comfort zone in practice. That might be a high competition level. That might be asking them to do something they're not quite ready to do. It might be skill development that they're lacking, because anytime you ask a player to do skill development that they're not real good at, it's out of their comfort zone. For instance, a player's not real good with his left hand, or his offhand weak hand. Well, I think you spend time on that, but that's a little bit out of his comfort zone because he doesn't usually do that. So maybe it's a 6 a.m. practice. Maybe it's maybe it's a time where in a practice session you stop practice in the middle of it and just say, hey, we're done. That's kind of out of their comfort zone. So there are a lot of ways I think you can get players out of their comfort zone, but I think that's a real huge piece of it. Another C is competition. You got to be able to compete. NBA scouts ask me all the time, really kind of the top question they ask me about players when they're evaluating players is how do they compete? Are they high level competitors? And we've had some players that are really high level, but are not really great competitors. And they get to the NBA and they find out soon that they're not going to make it in the NBA unless they're high level competitors. And then you have other kids who get drafted second round or don't get drafted that really make a team because of their high level being competitive. So I think, we as a coach have to get that competition, competitive juices flowing in practice in order to make them players understand that that's a huge part of them improving and them improving their skills, but also them improving their mental toughness. So that's obviously a big one. And then I would say, communication is a great thing. Players have to learn how to communicate. And I always say that 16, 17-year-old, first of all, 16, 17-year-olds, they don't know how to communicate. So we have to teach it. And one of the things we always end up with at the end of a practice is our communication circle. And in that circle, we always go through and tell people to the right or left, we ask the question for the day. Question for the day might be, tell a player to your left what you did good in practice. So you might say, hey, you rebounded really well. So we're communicating. We're looking them in the eye. We say, you got to look them in the eye, call them by their first name. So they have to say, hey, Johnny, I thought you did a really good job of rebounding today. So they know how to communicate. And part of it is, as coaches, we are always, we're always saying, hey, you got to communicate better on the floor. You got to communicate. Well, they really don't know how to communicate. And so we give them that. And then we also tell them the best way to communicate is to communicate early, loud, and often. So let's say on defense, you see a screen coming. You indicate, you call out screen early before it ever gets there. You say it often. When we say often, we mean 3 times. Hey, screen, screen, screen. You're not just going to babble off screen, screen, screen like young kids do. And then you're going to say it often, which is what I just said is 3 times. So early, loud, and often are the 3 main ways to communicate. So now you give the players some avenue of how to communicate on the court, and then you give them how to communicate off the court by your communication circle. So those are some things that we think are really important in educating players on the value of competition, the value of communication, the value of comfort zone in those areas.
In that communication circle, am I right? In the book, you talk about you making them hold hands while you do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's quite intimate. Is there any resistance to that?
The first day might be, but first of all, that's out of their comfort zone. And I know some coaches do it, and they say, well, instead of holding hands, they have them lock elbows. Which is maybe a little better way, better way for some people to do it. But after a while, it's automatic. They know what's coming. They know. So the resistance comes maybe the first couple times, and then after they see what we're doing, there doesn't seem to be much resistance with it. I think the first time they do it, they're kind of looking at each other and going, is this for real? Type of thing. But then I think once they go through, and we change questions every day. One day might be just, hey, what's your favorite food? Just so they get to know each other. Kids don't know each other very much anymore, even though they're playing on the same team. What's your favorite movie? Who's your favorite singer? Who's your favorite? What's your favorite car? Those kind of things are really important. And then I think what comes out of that is players tell other players what they do well. So that creates a role for that player without the coach telling him what the role is. So if I tell you, hey, you're a great rebounder, all of a sudden you're thinking, you know what? Johnny thinks I'm a really good rebounder. And so I'm going to make that my role. So now we have a roles being developed on your team, and it doesn't even come from the coach. It comes from the fellow teammates. So that's just the beauty of that over a length of time. The toughest question we always ask is, tell us something that nobody would know about you. That is the absolute toughest question, because now they kind of have to bare their soul. They have to trust their teammates. And we always say one thing is that whatever's said in that circle stays in that circle. And so, we've had people tell us that their uncle's in jail. They never knew their dad. All those kind of things are really eye openers and develop a really sense of, he's bearing his soul to us as a team, and we need to take it serious. And it really develops, I think, a caring and trusting attitude that we're looking for.
Oh, it's a great example and something I hadn't come across before. So thank you for sharing it, Don. But I was looking online and I found a great seminar that you gave on a coach's DNA, and you identified 5 core pillars of that DNA. I would love it if you could share that with the audience.
Well, if I can remember them offhand, but I think I can. The 5 pillars of, and I think this is the fact that we talk about DNA a little bit, and this is what makes up coaching. I think I referred to it a little bit earlier, but I think the first thing is the coach has to be a good teacher. They just have to know how to teach, and they have to know what the best way is to teach everybody in their team, just like a good teacher in a classroom. So a teacher is, they have to know laws of learning. In other words, you may learn really well if I explain something to you, you can do it, but somebody else on my team, they don't even have a clue when I just explain it. They have to see it, observe it. So I think the laws of learning come into effect here, where you have to explain it, then you have to show it what you want done, and then you rep it, repeat it over and over, because habits are built by reps. Habits are not built on me explaining something or somebody else doing something. So I think the reps, and then you correct the reps, and then you rep it again. So that's how you develop a good, solid skill foundation. And that goes into being a teacher. Second thing I would say is be authentic. Be who you are. Players can see right through you if you're not authentic. In other words, if you try and be somebody you're not, or you have an air about you that this isn't really who you are, that builds no trust and really takes the trust away from the players and the coach. So I think you need to just be authentic. And if you mess up as a coach, I think you need to admit that. Hey, you know what? We should have not played a man-to-man the whole game. We should have went to maybe a little bit of zone. So I think if you own up to a few things, I think that's being authentic. Then I think the players, you know what? They could trust you a lot more on that. So I think authentic is really something that coaches have. You can't be Coach K. You can't be Jay Wright. You got to be who you are. And without going any further into that this is an example of coaches getting their own identity, trying to get their own identity with their players. Young coaches have no identity yet. They have to establish that identity with their players. And then I talked about being organized earlier. I think that's one of the pillars of being a good coach is your organization. I talked about that. Also talked about the humility part to it. A great coach, a great saying. Jeff Van Gundy, who's a good friend of mine, he's a former NBA coach, and he's now he's on ESPN. But he had a great saying. He said there's 2 types of coaches: ones that are humble and ones that will be humbled. He said because basketball will eventually humble everybody, and that's so true. And then I think the last one for me that I talked about DNA is being adaptable, and coaches have to be adaptable to just so many things. You come to practice and you have 2 kids sick and somebody else. So now you're down to 9 players in a practice, and you have your perfect practice plan geared for 12 players. So you have to be adaptable. You have to be adaptable outside circumstances. And then I think game-wise, you got to be adaptable to what the other team does. Man, if I want to, I got to be adaptable to what the other coach does. If the other coach throws a zone at me and I don't get that, and I don't have a sense of that he did that for 2 or 3 or 4 trips down the court, that's not good. I got to be adaptable, and I got to be adaptable quick. So adaptability is something that I think that really. So I think those are the 5. To me, those are the 5 pillars that really make a coach a great coach, and they have to be developed. I think as a coach, the longer a coach coaches, I think those 5 things get to be developed as a coach and as a leader for your team.
One thing that's interesting about that list is that it doesn't necessarily touch on the role of mentors. And what comes through in the book is just your drive to not just meet people, but then connect with them. Maybe it's part of being authentic. There are so many stories where you'll meet someone, you'll send them a handwritten note, they'll write back to you, you'll form a relationship. That relationship will lead to, I guess, most famously, you being chosen to coach America.
Yep.
And it's just, it seems to define your life.
Yep.
And I wanted to know, you now mentor so many people as well. And you not only mentor people in America, you mentor them all over the world. So, Don, if you could talk more broadly about the role that a mentor can make or have in someone's life.
First of all, you raise a good point. I think, and I don't, at the time, I never even considered it, but I think part of the reason that I was able to make a lot of connections was because I was authentic. I wasn't trying to be somebody that was out there in left field and as a just as an afterthought, wrote a note. I mean, I and that's kind of just who I am. And I think being authentic really carried me to a lot of opportunities that I would not otherwise have. And so I think that word authentic, as you mentioned, is really an important piece. And then being a mentor, what really is a mentor? Well, I think a mentor is somebody that, as I look back on my mentors, a mentor is just somebody that's available for you to kind of lean on at times that you have, whether you have questions or decisions to make. I think a mentor is somebody that can help you in situations. And I've had a lot of mentors that were really, starting with Coach Wooden. My dad was a good mentor, obviously. I think that really formed me a lot. I had an uncle that was a great mentor. And sometimes mentors don't even give you necessarily answers, but they make you form your opinion about things. So, Coach Wooden would never really say, when you'd ask him, he would never really say, well, Don, I think you should do this. It was never that part of it being a mentor. He would say, well, Don, what do you think about this? Or how would it affect you if you did pursue this? So mentors, I think, really makes you think about your own situation as opposed to just giving you what to do, and if that makes sense. And I think that's what I try to do now. I mean, I get emails, constant emails, and phone calls from coaches who, whether, hey, can you send me your man-to-man offense, or I'm searching, I'm looking for a job, I'm applying for a job, and here's the situation. What do you think? And again, I try and how I was mentored was don't tell them what to do, but lay out the facts for them, and then they have to make their own decision. So I enjoy that piece of it. I mean, and people I still look for mentors in my life, even at after coaching 42 years of high school basketball and with USA basketball. So I think we never really stop searching for good mentors in our lives. I think that's something that we constantly are, drawn to, and I don't think, to me, usually you look as a mentor who's somebody older and wiser. Sometimes mentors can be younger people that have a little better sense of maybe a situation that they've been through. So, mentors are somebody that I think we all have to have a mentor, if not two or three that we can bounce things off of and lean on.
Oh, and you've had such a great career, 42 years, as you just said. I know that you're not coaching anymore, but you definitely are still mentoring, as you suggested in that last answer. But I'd like to finish just by asking you about the legacy that you hope you've left so far with the many, many peoples who you've connected with.
Yeah, well, you really, what is a legacy? I think definition of that is probably important before you try and come up with what your legacy is. But I guess my legacy is just how people remember you. I want people to remember me as somebody who, first of all, was very passionate and enthusiastic about the game of basketball. I think that's the first legacy that I would leave. Secondly, I think I would like to have people remember me as somebody who was a family man, who really was took his family. I took my family with me to camps in California. We loaded up our van at that time and threw things in the back, and we were off on a road trip. And and fortunately, my wife and kids really enjoyed that aspect. I think it was really good for our family. So I think that's a piece of a legacy that we all leave. I think what struck me, and when Pete wrote the book, and cut me off here if I'm going too far away, but what struck me most about the book, that Pete, when he had a lot of interviews, is things that former players were telling him that I really had forgotten, that I had, oh yeah, I remember that now after I read it. But it's interesting because they don't remember the same things you remember. And obviously you read the book, but very few of those players, they talk about games, but a lot of it was things that didn't have anything to do with winning or losing, which really tells me a lot. I think of building a legacy. They're gonna remember some wins and losses, but they're gonna remember more about what coach was like. What are some things that they go back to and refer to that I had said. And I think that struck me most about the book. So I think that's a piece of leaving a legacy as well. I know that's a long answer to probably a short question.
No, it's a difficult question. And we interviewed Mike Dunlap recently, who I know that you know. Yeah. And Mike, I think, and you share a very special skill, and that's the ability to teach, and not only teach elite players, but teach at all levels of society. And I think it's a very special skill, and I'm starting to form the opinion that it's actually teaching that is the foundation for leaving any kind of legacy. But,
Mike is one of my best friends, and he certainly is a basketball, he's a basketball junkie. He's passionate, he's enthusiastic, he's been at all levels too. So he and I share many, many of the same ideas about the teaching and how to get across to players.
Don, it's been great chatting with you today. It's been lovely for me reading the book and learning a little bit more about your journey and just how broad it's been. Thank you for today, and I wish you all the best for the book's climb up the charts. I know that it's out now, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Good, yeah. It's I know it's the pre-sales is pretty good, so I think it's interesting to a lot of different types of people. So I appreciate your efforts, and gosh, being on your podcast means a lot to me. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, you have been listening to the great coach Don Showalter. I hope you got a lot out of Don's down-to-earth style and found a few insights that you can bring to your own dinner table, locker room or boardroom table for discussion. When I listened back to Don, some of the other things that resonated with me were the strands of a coach's DNA, which includes humility, adaptability, teaching and organisation, and the examples he gives to illustrate each of them. The steps he takes to create a caring and trusting attitude within the group, the 4C framework he uses to evaluate players of similar talent, and his views on empowerment and how it is essential if you want to get everything you wanted done. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And just before we go, if you have any feedback, then please let us know. We love the interaction with the people around the world who listen. And so if you've got comments, feedback, or ideas on things we can improve or people we can interview, then please let us know. All the details on how to connect with us are in the show notes or on our website, thegreatcoachespodcast.com.